Hi, this is Edie with Millrace Center in the Kitchen today. We know that cooking classes are always really popular here at Millrace Center, and now while we're all kind of staying more inside and not coming into the center for our fabulous cooking classes, we thought we'd bring a few to you. We're going to focus on cooking for people who are at home by themselves, or maybe there's just two of you. And we're going to concentrate on very simple things that you have on hand already in your pantry. I call this series Table for One. So we're going to be doing several of these different cooking shows, and you'll see how the ingredients start together. Our main focus is that the food is delicious, nutritious, and easy to prepare, and that you don't make a lot of leftovers. So let's get started. Today's topic is going to be tomatoes. We all have canned tomatoes in our pantry, so I brought a couple of different types with me today. Crushed tomatoes, one of my favorite things to work with, and also fire roasted diced tomatoes. Now, if you don't have that in your cupboard, these recipes can be adapted to any tomatoes you have on hand. These are so simple, and these are not complicated. So if you have a small can or a large can, I'll show you some adaptations along the way. So let's get started. To begin with, I started this morning by cooking the tomatoes. We've already got the tomatoes nice and cooked. That's the key and secret to canned tomatoes. They need to be cooked for about an hour before you start putting them into recipes. It gets rid of that canned taste and starts making the flavor much richer. Then we start to add our veg. I've prepped a little bit of onion, so you won't watch me cry while I do this for you here, but we're going to chop up some onion, and my cooking skills aren't the best in the world. I'm not a fancy dicer like you see on the Food Network or Chopped. However, many of you don't know that I actually did work for a culinary school for many years before I came to Millrace Center. I also owned a restaurant, so I have a little insight into food, nutrition, and how to cook for a crowd. But today we're going to bring that way down and cook just for you. So I've taken about a half an onion here. We're going to take some olive oil, my favorite cooking oil, and we're going to put it in a pan. Just a couple tablespoons full of olive oil. And we're going to heat that up. Now, normally at home, and if you're making this, you can start by cooking your onions and your peppers at the same time and then add the tomatoes. But again, the key to that success with the tomatoes is to cook them for about an hour on medium to low heat before you start adding all these other ingredients. This is also really helpful when you're working in the kitchen. It is your garbage bowl, and that way you don't have to keep running back and forth to the trash. You just keep all your scraps in one place. And we're just cutting up a little bell pepper. Now, I also like to use red pepper, so if green pepper does not agree with you, or onion for that matter, you don't have to add these to the recipe. They just add to the flavor and the depth of the cooking. Plus, veggies are always good for us. Red pepper is a little milder and doesn't have that tendency to repeat like the green pepper does. So if you prefer, you can add a red pepper to your recipe. Now, we only need about a half a pepper, so you can save the rest of this pepper for another day or for cutting up and eating with the dips. So we'll set that aside. We're not needing a lot of green pepper for this particular recipe. What I'm doing is taking 1 can of tomatoes, essentially the crushed tomatoes, and we're going to make 3 different recipes out of 1 can. And that's the focus of Table for One. I'm going to be taking 1 item and showing you 3 different ways to use that item. And you can divide that up. For instance, in a few minutes, we'll be dividing up our tomato sauce so that we can make 3 different dishes with it, with 1 can. So into our hot oil goes, oh, you can hear the sizzle. Goes our beautiful onion. Turn that down just a little bit. Working with commercial stoves, they get very hot because they have to cook quickly for large crowds. As you can see, I have 3 pots on the stove here, so we're going to be making 3 very different things out of that 1 can of tomatoes. You want to cook your onions and peppers till the onions are soft and clear. They lose that white tone to them. They look a little translucent. While those are cooking, we can be adding some seasoning to our tomato sauce. Now, the tomatoes right now have nothing in them except the tomato. I, again, took that and simmered it for roughly an hour. We're going to add 2 teaspoons of Italian seasoning. And again, this is very flexible. You can add your own fresh herbs if you prefer. That's about a tablespoon there. And that's the Italian seasoning. We're going to add some garlic, because life is not very fun without garlic. Now, I actually know someone's allergic to garlic. So of course, anything you have issues with, you can just leave out or substitute other things. These recipes are very flexible. I'll be posting these recipes online as well with the quantities. So if you're just following along, you'll be able to read the actual ingredients as well and follow the recipes. Now we're going to add just about a half a teaspoon of salt. Another reason I like to make my own sauces is because I get to control how much salt and sugar are in them. Now if you like commercial tomato sauce, for instance, Prego or Ragu or even the store brand, that's fine. You can do that, but just be aware you aren't in control. You don't know how much sugar or how much sodium are in those, and believe me, the commercial products pack a wallop. And then we're going to do about a half a teaspoon of black pepper. So we've got salt, pepper, and we have our Italian seasoning in. Now if you prefer grated garlic to the powdered garlic, or even chopping up your own fresh, that's fine. You can substitute all over this recipe with no problem. And all we're doing right now is just making the base sauce. We're making a marinara, a basic tomato pasta sauce. You can see, I wish the camera was over here. You could see how rich and thick and delicious this is, but you'll be able to see it when we plate. We're limited in how we can film here at Millrace Center. All right, let me check my vegetables. They're almost ready. I want to have just a little bit more time on them. Go turn up that heat just a bit. What we're making today is a basic pasta sauce that you'll be able to use with your pastas. You can use it to spread on crostini, toasted bread. You can use it as a base for soups. You can use it for a lot of different things, but you don't have to have a whole big jar. That's the problem. A lot of you are by yourselves right now, especially with the quarantines and the stay-at-home orders. Many of you, there's just 2 of you, and the last thing we want to see is more leftovers. So this gives you an opportunity to not have that great big jar of pasta sauce sitting in the refrigerator getting old. You can make this and then divide it into other recipes. It can even be frozen. All right, our vegetables are ready. As you can see, the onions are translucent. The vegetables are all very well cooked through, so we're going to pour that into our tomato sauce. This adds flavor, it adds vegetables. Another thing you can add to this if you're trying to get more vegetables in your life is cooked carrots. You can dice carrots and put it in it and cook that with the tomato sauce. It sweetens the sauce slightly and adds a punch of flavor. All right. As I mentioned earlier, I did work for a culinary school. I didn't have the cooking classes. I wasn't with the chefs. However, we did have a lot of hands-on time with the chefs that worked there, and they taught me so much, and just a great appreciation of good food. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to divide this recipe. Before I do, I'm going to give you one more little hint. When you're dealing with canned tomatoes and with making a basic sauce, you want to add just a little bit of sugar. I had some sugar packets here at work, so I used a little bit of sugar rather than haul a big bag from home, because that's all it takes. To make a good sauce, you just need a tiny bit of sugar, and that offsets any acid that's left in those tomatoes that hasn't been cooked off yet. So just sprinkling a little bit of sugar around the sauce. And again, you're in control. If you don't want to use sugar, if you want to use stevia, if you don't want any sugar at all, you can taste test this and make it the way you want. But 1 tablespoon of sugar through 3 meals is not a big problem. It's not going to cause you a lot of grief. Now I'm going to divide the sauce. This gives us a chance to continue to season the sauce and use it for different things. So I brought 3 saucepans. I'm going to just scoop some of that sauce. That was the pan that had the vegetables in it, and it was still really hot. So about 2.5 scoops per quantity there, per bowl. The smells in here are so inviting. You can't imagine. There's nothing better than smelling those wonderful, herbaceous, Italian-type smells. But this goes in different directions. It's very Mediterranean. So we've all heard about the Mediterranean diet, and your doctors have probably told you it's very good for you, which it is. Turn my heat on low to simmer here for all of those. And I have 3 even amounts of the pasta sauce now. And that's pretty much done. That pasta sauce could go straight onto your favorite pasta. You can toss that with chicken, with hamburger, with shrimp, or just eat it plain. It's just delicious. The first dish we're going to be doing, or the main dish, is going to be a fish stew. This is very Mediterranean, very delicious. And the biggest key to this recipe is bay leaf. Bay leaves, we all have that little container in our cupboard, and we don't use it very often, maybe when you make a pot roast, or you may have a favorite recipe with bay leaf. But bay leaf makes all the difference in this dish, and we're going to use quite a few of them. Now, I've learned when you use bay leaf, count them, because they tend to disappear in sauces, and if you don't count them, someone will always get this in their last spoonful of food, and they are sharp. They're not fun. It's always my husband that gets the bay leaf, so I have to count them carefully. So for this recipe, in this quantity, I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, let's say 4 bay leaves in. They're pretty good size, too. 4 bay leaves and some chicken broth. Now, all the things I have here are things that you can get at Aldi. You can get at Kroger. I happened to stop by Fresh Thyme yesterday and picked up a few things. But this is stuff we all have in our cupboards, or should have in our cupboards, to make quick and easy meals. And we're going to add about half of one of these boxes. This is 32 ounces, so about 16 ounces of chicken broth to one of the pots. And I recommend you use the largest pot for this. You probably aren't going to make 3 different things in one day, but if you do, you're just going to incorporate that chicken broth, that tomato sauce, and the bay leaves, and let those simmer for a while. The longer you simmer, the richer the taste is on that, so you really want to get those in early. Turn that one off. So the other one I'm going to be making is, I need to get my eggs out of the refrigerator. I'll be right back. Safety first. We always keep our refrigerated things refrigerated until we need them. But this dish, the third dish we're going to make, is shakshuka. Shakshuka is basically poached eggs in a tomato sauce. It is Arabic, Mediterranean, Greek, and even the Israelis eat this for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The fun thing about shakshuka is you're in control. You can make it spicy, you can make it mild, you can make it more garlicky, you can make it sweeter. You get to decide, and you also get to decide what vegetables you put in it and what fun you have. Speaking of vegetables, before we get to our eggs, look what we have here. We have everybody's favorite, kale. Probably not your favorite, because kale's kind of a newish, trendy type of vegetable. But the truth is, kale's been around for centuries, and it's very nutritious. But it's kind of difficult to work with if you haven't worked with it before. We're going to start, and the eggs are going to cook very quickly in our shakshuka. So we're going to go back to our fish stew. First, we need to add the fish. Kroger sells individual pieces of fish in the counter. You can go and buy a nice piece of cod. But they also sell these bags of individually wrapped fish in the freezer compartment. And I love these. And the reason why is they're affordable and they're freezer wrapped individually. So I can just pull one out and use it for a recipe. The rest just go back in the refrigerator or freeze, or into the freezer. This bag cost about $10, and there were 7 pieces of fish in there. So it's quite a good value as well. So if you have a little extra freezer space, it's a good way to make sure you get some more fish into your life. We're going to use a separate cutting board for the fish. Always safety first. We want to use clean, separate cutting boards for our fish or our chicken. And we're going to just open that bag up and take out that fish. Now this is a pollock, but any good white fish will do. So you could use cod, whiting, orange roughy, any white fish that appeals to you. These are tender, flaky, and delicious, and very, very good for us. We know we need to eat more fish, but not fried fish. We're just going to cut that into rough chunks. It doesn't have to be pretty. They're going to cook down a little bit, but the more rustic, the better. This is Mediterranean food after all, and they love rustic food. Now, I did wash my hands very thoroughly before I even came on camera, but after I cut up this fish, I'm going to have to step away from the camera for just a moment and thoroughly wash my hands again before we move on to the next part of the recipe. But there we go. There's our fish, just cut up roughly. This is one piece, so you can see it makes quite a lot. So this would be great for 2 people. If you want to cut this recipe in half, just cut your fish in half and save half that fillet, maybe for another day, maybe a light saute or broil for that half a fillet. This goes into our tomato mix with the chicken broth, the bay leaf, and that wonderful tomato sauce we've been working on this. And we just stir to incorporate that and let that cook away. That's going to cook that fish right up, and it'll be incorporated. And it doesn't have a fishy taste. The tomato offsets the fish and keeps it from having that fishy taste that so many people are concerned about when they think about eating fish. I need to go wash those hands. I'll be right back. It does seem like all we do these days is wash our hands and wash our hands, but it's important, particularly when you're working with food. You don't want to cross-contaminate your healthy meals. You've already made it healthy. Let's keep it healthy by washing after chicken and washing up after we work with fish or chicken. So back to the dishes. We have our fish stew cooking nicely with the bay leaf, the fresh white, or the white fish in there, and the tomato sauce. I'm going to turn that up just a little bit because I really want those items to cook quickly. Our tomato sauce is done. Our tomato sauce is ready to go. You can use that on toasted bread. You can use that again with a pasta. You've made pasta sauce, and you can put that away for later. It stores for about 3 or 4 days in the refrigerator, or again, put it in a Ziploc bag and throw it in the freezer, and you're ready to go the next time you want fresh pasta sauce. This is also incredibly affordable. Everything you see here was probably about $10. And so you're going to make 3 meals for $10. And that's not bad at all, about $3 a meal. And that includes the fish when you take it out by portion. So let's get back to our shakshuka. As you can see, we have our tomato sauce boiling. That's ready to go. And that's important because it needs to be really hot for shakshuka. I'm going to thin that just a little bit with our chicken broth. If you want to use a little water, you could do that, just about 1/4 cup. We're just going to thin that out a little bit because we want to get a poach on these eggs. We don't want them to be sitting in thick tomato sauce and getting too rubbery. We want them to be able to get that nice moisture and steam that poaches an egg. Before we do that, we're about ready to put those eggs in. I know everybody's really excited to see that happen. We're going to slice some bread. Now, if you're on a low-carb diet, everything we've done up till now is low-carb. Hardly any carbs at all. But if you want to add some nice, good, crusty bread to your evening's enjoyment of these meals or lunchtime, then you're going to want to slice some whole grain bread. Thick as you'd like. I've already preheated the oven, and we're just going to toss those in the oven for a minute. I preheated the oven to 375, and we're just going to set the bread in there just for a couple of minutes to toast. Doesn't that sound good? A wonderful, delicious fish stew with a crusty bread, maybe a little olive oil drizzled on that. So let's get back to our kale. We need to put some kale into our fish stew also. That needs to soften up. It needs to cook. Now, I've washed this, and I've torn it into small pieces. So this is ready to go. Maybe run a knife through it. We can set that off to the side. We're finished with that. Just run a knife through some of your kale. We're going to do a whole class on kale in just a few minutes. So our next session is going to be, what in the world do I do with all this kale everybody's selling? And I'll show you what to do with that. So we're just going to cut up some kale, about a cup worth. It'll shrink down because it's going to go right into that fish stew. Now you can use spinach if you do not care for kale or don't have any on hand. Fresh spinach works really well with this recipe as well. So there's lots of substitutions. Again, we're looking at what do you have on hand, what's in your cupboard. But you want to add that greenery to it, that fresh veg. It just finishes this off and makes it healthy and delicious and pleasing to the eye as well. Very important when we're cooking. Now it's time for our eggs. Now eggs are packed full of nutrition. They are about 100 calories an egg. They contain proteins, they contain some important fats, and they contain lutein. Lutein is in that center of the egg, the yolk. So it's important that you don't just use egg whites. I'm going to do a whole session on eggs later, and we'll talk more about eggs and their nutrition value and how you can use both parts. But right now, we're just going to crack these eggs right into that tomato sauce. I used to fix this for my dad for breakfast when he would come to visit, and he loved it. He never got tired of having poached eggs and tomato sauce, basically, for breakfast. And my dad passed on, and that's one of the reasons I am focusing on doing these classes for you, because in the transition and helping my mom adjust to her new life, we found she didn't have a clue how to cook for one person. My dad loved food, and he always loved leftovers. So she was still cooking the same way she did when we kids were at home. Now that she's on her own, she needed some new ways of looking at food. So we've been working. So all these recipes have been test kitchened by my mom and mom approved. So again, we've got our eggs cooking. They're just sitting in on top of the tomato sauce, and they're just going to sit there for a few minutes. While those are cooking, I'm going to show you a little bit more about kale. Again, I'm going to do a session on kale, so you'll get this again in another session. But this is what kale looks like when you buy it from the grocery store. It's kind of stocky and curly and rough. Well, you need to clean it a little bit. I've washed these thoroughly and patted them dry with a paper towel. And then you just cut along that tough stem and get rid of it. The stem is not very good. It's not something we want to eat or use. Then you can just take your kale pieces and you can shred them or tear them. You can chop them. You can do lots of things with it, but that's kale and how you work with it. Again, thoroughly wash, cut off that heavy stem, and then you'll be ready to go working with kale. Next session's all about kale. So let's go back to our tomatoes. We've got our bread in the oven. We have our pasta sauce already done. I can plate that. We're almost done here. Believe it or not, these recipes, again, are quick and easy, delicious, and nutritious. My tomatoes, or my eggs aren't cooking quite as quickly as the others, so we're just going to go ahead and let those turn up a little bit, the heat on that. Look at that fabulous sauce. Now, I've been doing this for years. I don't buy commercial pasta sauce because it's so easy to make, it's so much better tasting, and so much better for you. So this is what we eat at the Smith household. And I've even been known to buy big jars of tomato juice and start with that, adding tomatoes and making big batches of this. But for just one or two people, this is plenty. You can see that's a third of our sauces. So it's plenty for one or two people for a nice pasta. And you could still have a little bit left over if you want to for the next day for lunch. Check on our bread in the oven. Should be nice and toasty. Nothing smells better than warm bread out of the oven, even if it's a loaf you bought at the store. Toss it in the oven for a few minutes. It revives that aroma, releases the oils in the bread, and gives you that fresh bread experience that we all enjoy. We're getting ready to do some plating now, so we're going to take our bread and put it on a plate. Get ready for our soup. So far, so good. I haven't really spilled anything except the spoons, and I haven't burned myself yet, so we're doing really well. Our soup is done. Look at that. Gorgeous, healthy, smells so good, And don't forget to check for those bay leaves. You want to make sure that you're getting those bay leaves out of the individual bowl. I think I see one. No, I managed to do that without getting a single bay leaf in there. Put another piece of bread on here. Let's see where I'll put it on the stove. And if you are on a low-carb diet, of course, you don't have to have the bread, but bread is life. Why not? You want to drizzle a little olive oil on your plate. Maybe a little salt and pepper. Olive oil is so much better for you than butter. And if you do a little salt and pepper, little drizzle, that will be plenty to enjoy with that bread. And our Shakshuka is done. Just that quick. It's just a quick poaching method, and you're poaching it in tomato sauce. And we're just going to scoop that up, and we're going to put it on our plate just like that. Beautiful. Now, again, eggs only have about 100 calories, so you can actually enjoy all of this whole plate, for about 500 calories. Isn't that a treat? Makes a delicious dinner. You can share that with friends, and you can eat it for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Well, that about wraps up our tomato lesson. We have our beautiful pasta sauce. Parmigiana. Never go wrong with a little Parmigiana on everything. Even our fish stew. Little bread, little eggs, little fish stew. And that's what you can do with a can of tomatoes in just about 20 minutes. Enjoy!